Chapter 21. The City of Gaal. Virginia's calves began to burn with each step she took. "Come on, girl. Come on. You're almost there. Do you realize that? You're almost there." All she could do was focus on placing one foot in front of the other. She lifted her head and gazed tiringly at the steep incline that stretched before her. Their path blazed straight up the alpine base of the Twin Mountains, soon to conclude at the top between their two peaks. The ground was a layer of loose dirt and gravel, and with each grueling step she took, she was unsure if she would slide back or not. Now and then she would fall forward and grip the loose gravel, sinking her fingers beneath the surface layer and act as if she were climbing. Charles was ahead of her, looking back at her occasionally and asking how she was doing. Virginia was relieved to see that she was not the only one. Beyond them were Nathaniel and Tristan. Nathaniel never seemed to buckle. As the path became steeper, she saw him draw his massive sword from behind his back, stab its blade into the earth, and use the instrument as an anchored hiking staff to stabilize each step. Tristan would fold into the climbing position occasionally, but only use one hand when he did. A hand reached out in front of her face. She looked up and saw Charles standing straight up on a path that was not slanted. "Good news," he said. "You made it." Virginia took his hand. He pulled her up over the final step of the sloped path and onto a flat, rocky surface. The trail turned into a plateau at the top of the hill, about 30 yards wide and stretched for nearly 300 yards, before dropping off another slope. To her left was the southern mountain, and to her right was the northern mountain. The salty breeze from the seashore beyond splashed against her face, surfacing memories of her old home. "Are we almost there?" she asked. "Almost," said Charles. "Once we reach the far side of this section of the path, you can look down and see the city from a far distance. From there, it's just a couple of miles." Charles, Virginia, Nathaniel, and Tristan continued their journey down the stone path. Hope swelled like a growing fire inside Virginia's heart as she neared the end of the course. The sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds beyond them. But it was not until Virginia came to the end of the path that it began to cast its light fully upon the valley below. A breeze from the sea came to kiss her face, carrying the taste of the ocean. She heard the sound of waves crashing and seagulls squawking down below. When her eyes adjusted, she saw the path that sloped down was not gravel and dirt, but steps hewn into the rock. Stone walls shielded each side of the staircase, decorated with pictorial etches and paintings. They all stood there, their clothes battering in the wind. Tristan smiled and pointed his finger to the northwest. "And there it is." Virginia squinted her eyes. The staircase that trailed down in front of her turned into a stone path and set higher than the sand. It reminded her of the Great Wall of China. It ran along the sands of the beach between the mountainsides and the ocean before stopping at a stretch of white walls that encompassed a massive city founded upon a rock foundation and extended for miles beside the waters of the sea, and at the center of the city sat a castle that shimmered in the rays of the sun. "Is it really right there?" asked Virginia hopefully. "Have I really made it?" "Yes, it is," said Charles, who stood beside her. "Behold, the great white city of Gaal, the last refuge of hope in the kingdom of El-Yamin." Virginia's heart began to race with excitement inside of her. She put her hands out for balance and started walking down the stairs. "Virginia?" questioned Charles. "Come on," she exclaimed. "We're almost there. We're almost there." She charged down the stairs, tripping over her feet in excitement. She never bothered to look to see if anyone was following her. However, she heard footsteps treading on the stone steps close behind. Running downhill was nowhere near as bad as hiking uphill, and it was not minutes before Virginia made it to the bottom. The stone wall-like path was about 10 feet wide, had no walls on either side, and stretched for 3 good miles before running into the city's borders in the distance. Virginia began to charge in a full sprint, but was snagged from behind by her cloak. She turned around and saw Charles holding her back. "Hold on," he exclaimed. "Hold on." "Hold on?" she questioned. "How can I hold on? The answers to everything I have nearly died trying to know are right there in that city. Come on, let's run." "No, no," he said, trying to catch his breath. You can't. You can't just run up those walls like that." "What? Why not?" Charles let her cloak go. They will not know what to make of it. If they suspect you for an opposing enemy, they will shoot you from the guard towers." Virginia suddenly found control over herself. Charles stood up and took a deep, deep breath. "Just wait for us. We will be with you. Then it will be okay." Virginia looked behind Charles and saw Tristan trying to take deep breaths through his nose. Even Nathaniel leaned forward, trying to catch his breath. He's right, Virginia," said Nathaniel. Are you boys seriously this short of breath after charging down those stairs? She asked with her hands on her hips. They all moaned and breathed hard in accord. Oh, I'm going to cherish this. I'm going to cherish this moment for the rest of my life. Behold, this is the day where all of you fit, athletic, rugged boys got your butts kicked by a city girl. She raised her fist in the air and shouted triumphantly. She drew her leg back. Butts, she swung her leg in the air. Kicked. They all moaned and rolled their eyes. Every one of them wanted to give excuses and reasons for being out of breath, but not one of them could muster up enough energy or a solid breath to refute her. Virginia walked over the path's edge, sat down, and hung her feet over the edge. Well, once you boys have regained your breaths, I'll be waiting right here. She closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath, and breathed it out proudly. Oh, yeah. She opened her eyes and saw the ocean waves washing across the beach. The sunlight glistened on the water's surface like stars twinkling upon the tides. Her feet dangled about 30 feet above the sands of the beach below. The march of the defeated footsteps walked solemnly past Virginia. She turned around and saw Tristan and Nathaniel walking towards the city walls, their faces downcast, but held up high. Charles came over and held out his hand. They're ready. Virginia took his hand and stood up. What's wrong with them? Charles shrugged his shoulders. Well, it's kind of like... Well, actually, more like a... Like what? Charles waved it off. Oh, it's just a matter of pride. It's a guy thing. Virginia's jaw dropped as a look of shock hung on her face. A pride thing? Like they can't believe they were beaten by a girl? They both began walking together. Well, said Charles, you have to understand they were calling out for you as they were running at the same time. When you do that, it makes it easier for you to lose your breath, which means less oxygen to course through your bloodstream, which means... Are you defending them? Oh, well, I mean, I'm just trying to give a logical explanation for why most of them lost their breath. Yes, why they lost their breath. Virginia's eyes widened. She slowly turned her head to face Charles. You sorry? No, I know what you're thinking, and believe me, all I'm trying to say is, turd. Wait, just let me finish. You sorry, defeated turd. You cannot admit that you lost. Now, see, if you would just let me explain the reasons behind it, then you would probably agree with, you got your butts kicked. I even had to hand them back to you. Why can't you just admit that you lost to a girl? Now listen, I'm not saying it's not impossible for a guy to lose to a girl, and of course, this time would be one of those times where a bunch of guys lost to a girl, right? Well, again, if you would just look at the reasons behind it with me, I'm sure you would agree that both yelling and running simultaneously does, in fact, make someone more worn out. Virginia crossed her arms and shook her head. I don't want to talk to you for the rest of this hike. Virginia, be reasonable. Look, we're about 2.5 miles from the city gates. Are you really going to be this stubborn at the last and final hike on this journey? Her eyes widened in shock. I'm stubborn. Look who's talking. You can't even admit that She caught herself. Nope, I'm not talking to you, not until you admit that I won. Virginia, this is ridiculous. Virginia turned her head without a word and stared out into the ocean, smirking. Charles rolled his eyes and shook his head. Virginia, seriously, this is kindergarten. Virginia said not a word, nor made any gesture as if to say she heard him. Charles leaned his head back and closed his eyes. All right, Virginia, you... He mumbled the last word of his sentence. I only heard half of that, she said, staring into the horizon. I said that you... That I what? It's hard to hear with all of these waves crashing against the... You won! You beat us and left us crying in the dust. I admit it. Suddenly, Tristan and Nathaniel stopped dead in their tracks, turned around, and looked at Charles with perplexed faces. Virginia turned her head back around, wearing a smile on her face. Thank you. Charles lowered his head in shame at his colleagues. Gentlemen, don't take it personally. Oh, no, said Virginia. She pointed a finger at every one of them. All of you learn from what this man has just admitted. Charles turned his head away in embarrassment. This is called humility, something that most girls actually find attractive in men. You sorry lot could learn from such an example. The whole crowd was caught dumbfounded. They had no idea what to do, what to say, or even what to address. Charles, said Nathaniel, did you just admit that... Oh, be quiet, spat Charles, rolling his eyes. Yes, I did. Now let's get on with it. Right, said Tristan, breaking the awkward silence. Carry on. If anybody feels that they are longing for competition to regain their honor, they can race me to the city gates, should they dare, challenged Virginia. No, no, said Charles. Remember what I said about them shooting anyone that they thought to be a... Without notice, Charles took off in a full sprint down the pathway, shouting and cheering victory calls as he ran. What? Shouted Virginia. You sorry? Instantly, she broke out into a full sprint, brushing past Tristan and Nathaniel. 2 miles to go, city girl, shouted Charles up ahead as he ran. Virginia's eyes became focused and her vision sharp. Her feet began to charge harder and harder. Before long, she was just behind Charles's heels. His war shirt fluttered in the wind as he ran. Virginia reached out, grabbed it, and pulled him back. Hey, he shouted. Hey, that's cheating. That's cheating. That's... The collar of his shirt pulled against his throat. He fell backward to the ground as Virginia raced past him, laughing all the way. Charles sprang to his feet and dashed off. Virginia looked behind her and saw not only Charles, but also Nathaniel and Tristan running at full speed. Charles began to catch up and run alongside her. She reached out to grab his shirt again, but he swatted her hand away every time she tried. Quit it, woman, he shouted. Enough of your cheating. My cheating, she shouted back. What about your cheating? That's different. That's okay. You can do that. Just not what you're doing. What? She reached out to snag his shirt again. Says who? He swatted her hand away. It's in the rule book. Look it up. She reached out again. Oh, you're something else, you know that? He swatted her hand away and began to laugh. Running up close behind came Tristan upon her other side. She saw him coming and tried to snag his cloak as well. Hey now, he shouted. You wouldn't try to prank an innocent blind man, would you? I'll make an exception, she shouted, laughing. She reached out and grabbed his cloak. With a firm tug, she sent him tripping over his feet. Tristan caught himself with his hands, but was not quick enough to get out of the way of Nathaniel, charging toward him. Like a bowling ball, he smashed into Tristan, and the two of them fell like pins. Virginia looked ahead and saw the large wooden gate getting closer. She broke out in a faster pace. Charles charged with all that he had left. They both reached out their hands. 40 feet, 30 feet, 20, 10, 5... Yes, screamed Virginia. Yes, I beat you again. Wait, said Charles, trying to draw deep breaths. Wait, I would like to address foul play. Virginia pressed her palms against her knees as she, too, began gasping for breath. Oh, you sorry. I'm sorry. You just tripped a blind man. Have you no remorse? He can see and you know it. But not without Uriah, he can't. Well, he was just flying over Tristan, wasn't he? Which means he could see me just as clearly as you could, and I won. I beg to differ. I heard it. I heard it clear as day. My hand touch first, followed closely by yours. Oh, whatever. Oh, no, I won. But you should consider yourself good. I mean, aside from the cheating and all, you nearly beat me. Cheating? She panted. What was that back there? No warning? No nothing. You cheated, and I won. Oh, no, I even have witnesses behind me who heard the same thing. And there are 2 of us up here who saw something completely different. Virginia and Charles looked up. Leaning over the guard tower were 2 male guards looking down at them. We both saw her hand touch the gate first, said one of the guards. Charles's jaw dropped. I beg your... Yes! Cheered Virginia, throwing her fists in the air. But don't take it too hard, continued the guard. After all, your hand came just behind hers. You should consider yourself good. Virginia pointed at Charles with both hands and began laughing. 2 eyewitnesses from a guard tower. What do you got? A bunch of lagging guys who are still a mile behind us? Charles looked behind and saw that what she said was, in fact, very accurate. Tristan and Nathaniel were still trying to stand back up after their nasty fall. You still tripped a blind man, he said. Who? Questioned the guard. Tristan? He doesn't count, and you know it. He's got the dove. Virginia kept her hand over her mouth to muffle her laughter, but it served very little in holding back her sniggering as she continued to point a finger at Charles. Charles pointed a finger up at the guard. Enough out of you. Now let us in. Soaring Eagle, said the guard as he walked away. Try not to feel intimidated by all the other women in the city. I'm sure you could beat them in a race any day. Virginia stood in front of the gate, her hands behind her back and a smile on her face. I beat you. Charles smiled and rolled his eyes. Yes, you did. She turned her head to see if that was genuine. Charles winked at her and added, but don't tell the guys I told you so. Virginia tried to hold back a big smile stretching across her face. You have my word. Virginia could hear what she thought to be a massive latch being removed from its place. Then the two large wooden doors that were closed tightly slowly began to open. She reached for Charles's hand and nervously held it tight in her clasp. "Virginia," said Charles. "Virginia, it's going to be okay." Virginia did not hear a word of what Charles was saying. She pulled herself closer to him, wrapped her arms around his right arm, and hugged it tightly. The doors were more than halfway open. "This is it," she said. "This is it." "Yes," said Charles. "Yes, it is. Indeed it is. But my arm, I can't feel it. If you wouldn't mind. Just a little looser, perhaps." The doors were almost fully opened. Virginia squeezed his arm tighter. "This is it. This is it. Virginia." "Shh," she snapped. "Don't ruin it." The doors completed their turns with a loud thud on either side. Virginia squeezed Charles's arm tighter. What do we do now?" Seeing that Virginia would not let go, Charles took advantage of the situation and began walking her through the gate. "Well, we walk through the gate, and then, ta-da!" Virginia found herself behind the walls of the City of Gaal. The streets were paved with white stone. Before her was a path that led to a courtyard. Directly in the courtyard's center was a 15-foot stone arch with no walls or other support. Only a single lantern with a flickering light hung from its top, similar to the tree arch Charles took her through. From the stone arch, the path split off into 3 different directions. One way led to the left and the other to the right. The path to the left led to a series of corridors with second- and third-story houses made of white stone. The way to the right led into a garden area that branched off into multiple paths, weaving through its many floral and botanical sightings. The third path continued beyond the stone arch and led to an open door of a sizable castle-like fortress. The fortress had 4 primary towers stationed at each corner of its walls, rising high into the heavens. Directly in the castle's center was a single tower that stretched taller than any of the other 4. People walked to and from the paths up ahead. Some came out of the gardens, pulling behind them small carts that held vegetation and herbs. Others came from the neighborhoods of houses and corridors. Some talked and walked at the same time. Children were in groups of other children, running and playing with each other. Women carried woven baskets or clay jars as they walked about their business. All of them gave a brief glance at Virginia in passing, but continued about their business. "Welcome to the City of Gaal, Virginia," said Charles. Virginia stood marveling at everything around her. She looked down and stomped on the ground beneath her feet. "It's real. I'm really here." "Wow, you're a mean racer," said Tristan, walking up behind Virginia. "Competitive, no doubt," added Nathaniel, "but I guess that could come in handy in a fight." Virginia did not hear their words. She just continued to gaze in amazement and disbelief at everything around her. Tristan and Nathaniel looked at each other and smiled. "What do you think, Virginia?" asked Tristan. She turned around and looked at Tristan. "Am I really here?" "Do you doubt your eyes?" he asked. Virginia chuckled and continued to look all around her. "Hey, Virginia," said Charles. "Yeah? Come, follow me. I'm going to take you to meet someone." "Who?" "His name is Daniel. You remember us talking about him the other day, right? He's one of the city's elders, and he's also the head scribe and overseer of the city's library." Virginia stopped gazing around and looked at Charles. "Why are you taking me to see a librarian first?" "Well, it is required by the city's laws to report all new refugees to at least one city elder. Plus, he will be the one to whom you will ask all your questions." "Oh, well, in that case, where is he?" "Let's find him." Charles led Virginia around the arch in the center of the courtyard and down the path leading to the castle's entrance. As she walked, she noticed that the people walking by her were suddenly beginning to slow down and look at her more curiously. It was not long before their puzzled faces soon changed into looks of shock and excitement. They began to whisper amongst themselves new conversations. Virginia could only guess what they were talking about, but confirmation found her when she heard the word Cohen being tossed back and forth amongst themselves. Charles led Virginia through the door of the fortress, and she was glad to be out of their sight finally. "Is everything all right, Virginia?" asked Nathaniel. "Yeah," she said. "I just don't like it when people stare at me like that." She crossed her arms and tucked her head down out of sight. "At least my questions will have answers, proving once and for all to everyone that I am not Rose Cohen." The door they walked through led into a vast dining hall. The floor was of large stone tile, the ceiling arched like an ancient Romanesque cathedral, painted with stories that took place in Aletheia long ago. The walls were made of stone blocks that reminded Virginia of a medieval castle decorated with framed paintings, shields, weaponry, and drapes, and in the middle of the hall sat a long table on top of a red rug. A matching red table runner stretched across its surface, anchored by 7 evenly spaced candle stands that crowned its top in a majestic shimmering glow. "This way," said Charles. He led her past the long table to a thick oak door on the far side of the room. "Soaring Eagle?" said Nathaniel. Charles turned around. "Yes?" "I need to report to the captain of the wall and prepare for this evening unless you need me further." Charles shook his head. "My brother, I cannot thank you enough for everything." They both nodded and went their ways. "Nathaniel," Virginia called out. He stopped to look at her. "Thank you for everything you did for me," she said. He smiled and lowered his head. "My pleasure." Nathaniel walked through the castle entrance and out of sight down one of the city streets. Charles opened the large wooden door in front of him. It led to a stone staircase that spiraled up one of the wall towers. Charles led the way. Virginia followed next, with Tristan following behind her. The staircase was dark and chilly and would have been pitch black if not for the torches braced into the side of the stone walls just above its rope handrail. They completed one rotation before reaching a door at the second story. Charles pushed it open, and they stepped into a long hallway with torches mounted along its left wall and heavy oak doors evenly spaced on its right. Charles walked to the first door, knocked on it, and waited for a response. "Come in," said a muffled voice behind the oak door. Charles placed his hand on the doorknob and looked back at Virginia. "This is it. Are you ready?" Virginia's blood began to rush inside of her, unlike ever before. "Yes, I've been ready." Charles smiled, pushed the door open, and stepped in. A light began to shine on the staircase that came from the room. Virginia walked into the room that she believed would hold all her answers. She held her hand before her face, trying to shield her adjusting eyes from the sunlight shining through the window. She saw Charles standing in front of her, embracing a plump little man who looked to be only 5 feet tall, wearing a white tunic, leather sandals, and a pair of bifocals on his face. "Upon my word," exclaimed the man. "Look at who is here." Charles released the man from their embrace and stood beside him. "Daniel, this is Virginia. Virginia, this is Daniel. He's one of the elders of the city." Virginia reached out her hand. "Nice to meet you, sir." Daniel reached out his hand and gently shook Virginia's hand. "It is an honor, Your Highness." Virginia's hand went clammy in the man's hand as she pulled it away, slowly, nervously nodding her head. "Even you think I'm some kind of royalty." "Daniel," said Charles, "we have journeyed for many days. We have come to bring Virginia here for protection." He looked at Virginia and also to get some answers of her own. Virginia's face lit up. "Indeed," said Daniel. "We have been expecting and preparing for you ever since the dove came from the chief of the Naomi to send for help. When Tristan and Nathaniel came to assist you on your quest, the whole city has been bursting with excitement to find that Cohen has returned to us." Virginia felt like her heart was going to explode. "The whole city? Now they all think that I'm Rose Cohen. Can things get any worse?" "And find her we did," exclaimed Tristan from behind. Daniel held out his arms. "Ah, my pupil, you have returned in one piece." Tristan embraced the old man. "Well, of course. What? Were you afraid that a blind boy would not be able to find his way back to his most beloved city and to his most cherished teacher?" Daniel viciously rubbed his hand on top of Tristan's blonde hair. "Ah, that's my boy. Did you remember everything I taught you?" "Absolutely. Well, except that one thing." "And what was that one thing?" "I don't know. I'll tell you once I remember." Both teacher and pupil began to cut up and laugh together. Daniel slapped his hand upon Tristan's back. "My boy, you are going to make it far, I tell you." Daniel stroked his beard. "Now, let's see. What are the top 2 commandments in the kingdom of El Yamin?" "Give Oral Muti everything I have and care for my neighbor as much as I would myself," said Tristan. "And what is rule number 1? Protect myself at all times. And what is rule number 2? Never eat hot salsa and spicy chili together. Well, never again anyway, especially on a camping trip." The older man wrapped his arms like a bear around Tristan and bellowed a deep laugh. "My boy, you'll do great. You'll do great." Virginia raised a brow. "This is the wise elder who is going to answer my questions?" "It is really good to see you again, Master," said Tristan, stepping back after hugging Daniel. "But I'm afraid that Virginia here has a lot of questions to ask you, and it would only be a hindrance if I were to stay and distract you from her any longer." Daniel's face lit up in surprise as he looked at Virginia. Oh my, bless me, I got distracted in applauding my student for his safe return, and here I am forgetting the girl, the very one that he and Nathaniel went out to bring here for safety. Virginia frowned her eyebrows. Gee, thanks. All right, my boy, said Daniel. You and Soaring Eagle make yourselves back downstairs, and Miss Virginia and I will begin our first lesson together. Virginia became worried as she saw Tristan and Charles leaving the room. Quickly, she grabbed Charles's arm before he passed her. Charles, she said timidly, don't leave me here alone. With him? A look of perplexity crossed Charles's face. What? Why? She softly whispered her next sentence. Because he's crazy? Charles laughed and shook his head. He's not that crazy. Huh? Charles slowly loosened Virginia's grip from his arm. I'm just teasing. He's fine. Trust me, after everything we've been through together, do you honestly think I would leave you in the hands of a man I did not trust? Virginia watched the old man hobbling through the library, pulling off books and scrolls from the shelves. No? Then there you go. Virginia's hand completely slipped off Charles's arm. Oh, Soaring Eagle, exclaimed Daniel, carrying an armful of literature. I almost forgot to tell you. Your trainer arrived several days ago, and as you can imagine, he's been very anxious to know the exact moment that you and Cohen arrive. Charles smiled. I was hoping that he would show up here before us. Where is he now? Last I heard, he was at the training center. If he's not there, you might want to try his house. Thank you, Daniel. Charles turned around and began walking out of the library. Your trainer? Asked Virginia. Charles turned around in the doorframe. Yes, he has trained me in the art of combat and flight for many, many years now. You could say that he took me under his wing. Will I get to meet him? Charles smiled big. I think that would be unavoidable. What's he like? Is he nice? Will I like him? Charles just continued to smile. I think you will. Charles closed the door, but not before saying one final word. Have fun. The door was closed, and Virginia could hear Charles's footsteps echoing down the stone stairs until they faded. She stood alone in the library, looking at the door, as Daniel continued pulling off more books and scrolls from the shelves. Come, he said to her. Please, sit down. Virginia tugged at the ends of her cloak sleeves. She turned around and looked for a place to sit down. Before her was a long wooden table with matching wooden benches, and on the other side were two red leather chairs that appeared more comfortable. Virginia walked around the table and sank into the leather-cushioned chair while Daniel gathered material from around the room. Having a moment to sit and relax, Virginia had the chance to look around. Behind her and running around the entire room were nothing but bookshelves. It was as if they were the walls themselves. In front of her was the wooden table. To her right, the room continued to go deeper for about 30 to 50 feet and contained many shelf units, all holding more reading material. Daniel hobbled back to that wooden table, his arms packed with books and scrolls he had collected from the shelves. Squatting down just enough, he spilled them across the tabletop. There, he said, placing his hands on his hips. That should be enough for now, I do believe. Virginia sat looking at all the books and rolled up parchments before her. Do you work here all by yourself? She noticed that Daniel's face went from cheerful to sorrowful. He sat down on the wooden bench with his back facing Virginia. Yes, my dear, he said, but there was a time when I had a very close friend who worked with me. Virginia felt horrible. Oh, no. Who was he? His name was Adam. Daniel lowered his head. He and I managed this library together. We would spend a lot of time and effort gathering any lost material of the history of Aletheia and storing it in this library. He particularly loved to study languages. Poor old fool. It drove him to his grave. What happened? No one knows. Daniel took off his bifocals and rested his face in his hand. He was addicted to studying so much that he never slept. I watched as he became weaker and weaker by the day. One morning I came up here and found him dead, with a book in his lap, his head leaning back, his eyes staring aimlessly at the ceiling. Oh, my. With his other hand, Daniel pointed to the chair Virginia was sitting in. He died in that very chair. Horror filled Virginia's heart as she sprang to her feet. Instantly, she began to wipe down her backside and legs with her hands, brushing off any bit of dead Adam that remained from the chair. I'm so sorry, she said, shaking. I'm so sorry for your... Daniel placed his hands on his stomach and leaned back on the bench, laughing like a drunk Viking. He became so hysterical that he almost fell off the bench. My apologies, he bellowed. My apologies, Your Highness. Do forgive an old man. Confusion was the only thing seen on Virginia's face. I'm sorry? Oh, my dear, there There was never an atom in this library. Do pardon an old man for his innocent jokes, but I could not help myself. He leaned back again as a burst of untamed laughter bellowed out of his stomach. I don't get out much, my dear. Virginia did not know whether to leave the room angrily or stay and laugh with the elderly scholar. She found herself rolling her eyes and laughing with him. Okay, she said. I'll admit it, that was a good one. Daniel laughed even harder. Oh, it is a relief to hear you say that, my dear. Virginia placed her hands on her hips, smirked at the laughing man, and shook her head. Daniel sat upright and rested himself against the top of the table. He dried his eyes with one hand and patted his other on the bench beside him. Come, he said, sit here. Virginia came and sat down beside the scribe. Daniel placed his bifocals on his face and plunged his hands into the pile of books and scrolls in front of him, rummaging through until he found the one he was looking for, pulled it out, and placed it on the table between Virginia and himself. Now, my dear, he said, smiling, I believe that you must have quite a lot of questions. Virginia's heart began to race. Her eyes widened like a young girl who walked into a candy store. Oh, you have no idea.
This is the end of Chapter 21. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 22. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.